Good afternoon, Trekkie Dave here again, and this is video number 6. And today I'm wanting to talk about a couple of franchises that I love. One is the MCU, which is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I told my wife I would give the full name there because she didn't know what the MCU was, which, yeah, it is kind of funny they call it the MCU, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And the other one is the James Bond franchise. There's a couple of points I wanted to make about it. First off, I wanted to comment about how similar they are. And I'm not sure if people really realize it, but that they're very similar. And also that they're treated differently, which I find very odd. As a MCU fan, I sometimes get a little bit pissed off about how the mainstream treats the Marvel universe compared to, say, something like James Bond, which is, to me, basically the same thing in a lot of ways. But anyways, the reason for this video is I loved Black Widow. I think it's a great film. I think it's an amazing movie. It's surprisingly been my favorite film this year. Like, I love Zack Snyder's Justice League, but I really loved Black Widow. I think its narrative is just so, its themes and narrative are just so concise and to the point, and there's just a lot going on there that I think has been missed by the mainstream media critics and just by, surprisingly, by Marvel fans in general, which the film got a bit of a lukewarm reception. And I've seen some real critical reviews on it, like Red Letter Media, for example, with Jay and Mike. I don't know what the hell they saw, but way too critical. So anyways, I thought I would just kind of defend it a little bit, but also discuss its overall connection to pop culture and so forth. So my take on Black Widow is that it's a homage to 1979's Moonraker, which was a James Bond film with Roger Moore. It's very similar. It has a lot of the same similar story beats and just tone and tenor. Both films are very similar. Moonraker isn't a very popular James Bond film. Moonraker was the first James Bond film I saw in the theater as a 10-year-old kid. I love Moonraker. I think it's an amazing film. I think it's the pinnacle of Roger Moore's James Bond. That was back when James Bond was just so, well, I wrote something down here about it. Roger Moore was the representation of me, of my personal favorite Bond. He was Bond as fun, often reckless, international spy, a man with a license to kill, both equally dangerous and seductive. A Bond that shunned society norms on his path of death and female conquest. Like, it was just such a ridiculous time, but that's what Roger Moore's Bond was. This was a Bond that men envied and women adored and all that kind of stuff, right? And Moore captured that, this kind of believable, carefree way that he personified the character. And it's interesting because Moonraker is in some ways a very campy movie, but it's never campy when it comes to the James Bond character or it comes to the villain, Drax. Both are treated extremely seriously, just like Black Widow. So Black Widow has campy elements as well, but like Moonraker, it keeps the important stuff serious, and I think that's why it works so well. But for me, Moonraker has always been one of my favorite James Bond films. I'd put it in the top 5. And interesting enough, Black Widow for the MCU, I'd also put it in the top 5. I'd have it as just behind Winter Soldier, and after that I would put, say, Civil War. And what I love about Black Widow is it's a James Bond film. It's structurally like Moonraker. And what I also love about Black Widow is it's a continuation of the story that the Russo brothers did with Winter Soldier and Civil War. It's an extension of that story. I love that the director of the film, which I'm not really familiar with, I don't know her, but the director is a lady named Kate. Kate Shortland was the director of the film, and I love the way she incorporated feminist themes into the film. Ideas like the Black Widow assassins and little girls being kidnapped and basically trafficked or whatever as assassins, like those kind of feminist ideas, and that the film carries through with those, which I think is really interesting. And ideas like the Taskmaster character as a mistake from Black Widow's past that she needs to face. She needs to show empathy towards this villain and basically help her. So anyways, one of the things I wanted to bring up in this is over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of criticisms towards Marvel for the way that they make movies. And I don't like it because I don't believe the criticisms are fair. I think it was about 2 years ago, Martin Scorsese made a comment that the MCU wasn't really cinema, that it's basically, he likened it to a amusement park ride. And I would just like to point out that you could say that about any genre of film that we currently have. I mean, I could make that same argument about Martin Scorsese films. Martin Scorsese films, he makes gangster films. He always makes gangster films, whether we're talking about The Irishman or Goodfellas. And all of them have all genre films follow a pattern. Gangster films are not that much different from other genre films, say spy films like James Bond and Black Widow. Gangster films are all kind of similar. Like, I would argue that Goodfellas is very similar to The Godfather and so forth. So I think it's rather ironic that Martin Scorsese, who basically mostly only does gangster films, would make a comment like that. And then this week it got brought up again because Denis Villeneuve, who I really like, he's a Canadian director, I'm Canadian, and he just completed the Dune movie, which I'm really looking forward to on October 22nd. But he made a similar comment to Martin Scorsese, basically criticizing Marvel for following a pattern, for it not being creative enough. And then the Red Letter Media review that Jay and Mike did, Jay was making similar comments. And I just want to push back on his comments because Jay doesn't know what he's talking about. And I want to point out a couple of things he said that are simply not true. Or they're true, but they're not unusual. One of the issues that Jay has now with Marvel, with Black Widow, but apparently didn't have with the other 24 Marvel films prior to this. But now that, I'm not saying it's because it's a female lead, but now that we have a female lead film, suddenly it's an issue. But the issue is that the special effects department for Marvel pre-vids the action scenes. This has gone on in Hollywood for decades. They pre-vidded The Wizard of Oz back in 1939. James Bond does that with all of their films. What happens is they're going to do a action scene. They get the stunt people involved. They get the special effects people involved. They all become involved and they pre-vid the entire movie or those sequences, which just means they storyboard them and they plan what they're going to do because they're not normal sequences. That's really common and normal in Hollywood. Hollywood's always done that. Moonraker was pre-vid back in 1979. So this argument that somehow Marvel isn't really cinema because Kate isn't pre-vidding those by herself is not a real argument. It's not, it doesn't disqualify Marvel in some way. despite what Jay thinks or people are now trying to say, because that's always been a part of Hollywood from the beginning of time. Like when the special effects guys from Trumbull and Dykstra took over Star Trek the Motion Picture, they pre-vided all of the special effects. Um, Robert Wise didn't do that. The special effects experts did. That's the way it's always worked. So that argument is completely invalid and it doesn't apply. So James Bond, to me, the James Bond series is not any different than the Marvel series. Those films have always followed a formula. Moonraker, James Bond is uncovering a mystery. He's a spy. He's hopping around the world. He's sleeping with gorgeous women. He's having fights on trains. He's an assassin. It's a formula, just like a gangster formula, or in this case with Marvel, the superhero formula. So anyways, a homage. The definition of what a homage is, it's not a reboot, it's not a copy, but it does share the same DNA. It's a spy thriller. So it shares the same DNA as Moonraker. And there's a bunch of sequences that are very similar. And I'm not sure if people are entirely thinking it out when they're watching Black Widow, because things like the villain in Black Widow is more of a James Bond villain than he is a Marvel villain. So he's not a Thanos or a Killmonger. He's a James Bond villain. He's involved in trafficking women or young girls to become assassins, and he's trying to take over the world. That's a very James Bond idea. His sky base, the Red Room, that is basically a station in the sky, that's right out of Moonraker. Moonraker is Drax's space station. It's they look identical. So that's one concept that's very similar. The skydiving scene in Moonraker where James Bond jumps out of the airplane without a parachute and then gets a parachute. The same thing happens at the end of Black Widow. So the movie shares the two movies share all of these same story beats. And I think that's why I loved Black Widow so much and why I reacted so favorably to that, because I recognized that in the theater when I was watching it, that it's a homage to Moonraker and to James Bond. And in the movie, Natasha, Black Widow, is even watching Moonraker at one point, which is funny. So they're not even, hiding the connection. They're coming right out and showing the audience, yeah, Natasha knows Moonraker, and she's in this James Bond world. So anyways, I just wanted to point that out because I've never heard criticisms towards gangster films or towards James Bond films for following a pattern. And I've gotten a little tired of that being this thing we keep hearing about Marvel and, the Martin Scorsese's and so forth, for some reason wanting to point this out to us. And that's basically it. That's the gist of this video, is I wanted to say why I liked Black Widow, why I think it's an exceptional movie. And just when you watch it, watch Moonraker first, then watch Black Widow, and I think you're going to see what I'm talking about. It's cool. So that's it. So if you like what you've seen today, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and I think that's it. Okay, thank you. Trekkie Dave out. God bless and everything, and take care.